In The Power, Naomi Alderman delivers a masterclass in feminist speculative fiction that crackles with unbridled female rage. Alderman's premise, women developing the ability to release electrical jolts from their bodies, serves as both literal and metaphorical conduit for centuries of suppressed feminine fury. Through her frame narrative structure, alternating between a distant future correspondence and the unfolding revolution, Alderman creates a disquieting distance that allows readers to witness the seismic shift in gender dynamics with clinical precision. The novel's strength lies in its unflinching portrayal of how rage transforms from personal to political. When a teenage girl first discovers her ability to defend herself against an attacker, the visceral description, "Her fingertips bloom with bluish crackles of light," captures the exhilarating release of power long denied. Alderman's measured prose deliberately avoids sensationalizing violence, instead normalizing it within her inverted power structure, forcing readers to confront their own gendered expectations about who wields power and how. Published in 2016, The Power now reads as eerily prescient, anticipating the global reckoning with gender-based power imbalances that would erupt with the #MeToo movement. Unlike Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, which depicts women's subjugation, Alderman's narrative dares to imagine women as the architects of a new world order, questioning whether power itself is the corrupting force rather than gender. The novel's genius lies in its uncomfortable mirror. As readers initially cheer women's empowerment, they must eventually confront how absolute power corrupts absolutely, regardless of who wields it. This tension makes The Power essential reading in an era grappling with questions of structural inequality, gendered violence, and revolutionary change. Alderman refuses easy answers or utopian fantasies, instead challenging readers to examine power's fundamental nature. The core of Alderman's narrative revolves around 4 characters, whose intertwined stories form the backbone of this global transformation. Through them, she explores how power operates at different levels: intimate relationships, religious institutions, criminal enterprises, and governmental structures. The protagonist Roxy's journey from East End crime family daughter to global influencer particularly showcases the complex interplay between personal vengeance and systemic change. Stylistically, Alderman employs clinical distance interspersed with moments of shocking intimacy. The novel's archaeological frame, presenting the story as historical artifacts discovered millennia later, creates an unnerving sense that everything we witness is simultaneously happening and already fossilized in history. This approach mirrors the way female rage itself has been simultaneously ever-present, yet historically dismissed. The novel's world-building excels in its meticulous attention to sociological detail, from the emergence of new religions to shifts in international relations, making the fantastical premise feel unnervingly plausible. For readers drawn to thought experiments taken to their logical, often brutal conclusions, The Power delivers a shock to the system that lingers long after its final page. In Circe, Madeline Miller masterfully resurrects the mythological retelling, infusing it with a distinctly feminist perspective that transforms an ancient narrative into a searing exploration of female rage. This is not mere rage, but a divine fury, cosmic in scope, yet intimate in its rendering. Miller's narrative brilliance manifests in her decision to elevate Circe from a footnote in Odysseus's journey to the architect of her own existence. The transformation scenes, particularly when Circe discovers her pharmakeia powers and turns men into swine, serve as catalytic moments where suppressed rage crystallizes into action. Miller's prose flows with lyrical intensity, alternating between the sweeping epic style of classical mythology and the intimate psychological acuity of contemporary fiction. Her first-person narration allows readers unprecedented access to the cauldron of Circe's consciousness, where righteous anger at patriarchal subjugation simmers for centuries before boiling over in acts of defiance. When Circe proclaims, "I thought I cannot bear this world a moment longer," Miller captures the exquisite breaking point where feminine forbearance transmutes into power. In Gone Girl, Gillian Flynn masterfully weaponizes the domestic noir subgenre to excavate the theme of female rage with surgical precision. The novel's dual narrative structure, alternating between Nick's present-tense account and Amy's diary entries, creates a disorienting hall of mirrors that perfectly embodies psychological thriller conventions while subverting them. Flynn's meticulous attention to the mundane details of marriage becomes increasingly sinister as the story progresses, with ordinary domestic spaces transformed into battlegrounds. The calculated coldness of Amy's voice, particularly as her true nature emerges, offers one of contemporary literature's most unflinching portraits of feminine fury, not as irrational outbursts, but as methodical response to patriarchal expectations. Through Amy Dunn, Flynn has crafted a character whose rage is not merely emotional, but intellectual, a weaponized response to societal constraints that demands both revulsion and reluctant admiration. The novel's narrative sleight of hand mirrors the performance of femininity itself, a carefully constructed facade concealing deeper, darker truths. Gone Girl arrived at a pivotal cultural moment when discussions about gender roles, female agency, and the cool girl archetype were beginning to proliferate across social media. Unlike more straightforward explorations of feminist themes found in works like The Power, feminist literature, Flynn's approach is deliberately provocative and morally complex. The novel refuses easy political categorization, challenging readers who might prefer their feminist narratives with clearer heroes and villains. This ambiguity makes Gone Girl particularly resonant in our current climate of nuanced gender discourse. Flynn's willingness to embrace female characters who are deeply flawed, even monstrous, represents a significant departure from traditional depictions of women in thriller fiction. Where many novels explore female trauma through victimhood, Gone Girl dares to examine how that trauma can calcify into something dangerous and destructive. The book's cultural staying power stems precisely from this uncomfortable confrontation with female rage, as neither wholly justified nor wholly condemned. At its core, Gone Girl examines the performance of identity in modern relationships, how we construct ourselves for others, and the resentment that festers beneath these performances. The novel's pivotal twist serves as more than mere plot device. It ruptures the narrative to reveal the chasm between public persona and private self. Flynn's prose oscillates between icy detachment and visceral imagery, creating a psychological landscape as treacherous as the plot itself. The marriage between Nick and Amy functions as both specific character study and broader cultural commentary on heterosexual partnership in the aftermath of economic collapse and shifting gender dynamics. Throughout the novel, media narratives function as another form of fiction, easily manipulated but no less powerful in shaping perception and reality. Flynn's greatest achievement may be her refusal to provide moral certainty or easy catharsis, instead leaving readers to navigate the unsettling terrain between understanding female rage and confronting its potential consequences when unleashed without constraint. In Jane Eyre, Charlotte Bronte masterfully melds Gothic fiction with Bildungsroman to create a vessel perfectly suited to contain the protagonist's simmering rage. The novel's Gothic elements, Thornfield's shadowy corridors, mysterious laughter echoing through the night, and the looming presence of the mad woman in the attic, serve not merely as atmospheric flourishes, but as physical manifestations of the protagonist's suppressed fury. Bronte's narrative innovation lies in her use of first-person perspective, allowing readers unprecedented access to a female character's raw emotional landscape. When Jane declares, "I am a free human being with an independent will," the statement reverberates not as a calm assertion, but as the culmination of years of silent indignation. The novel's most incendiary moments, Jane's childhood rebellion against her aunt, her refusal to be Rochester's mistress, her rejection of St. John's loveless proposal, function as controlled explosions, strategically deployed throughout the narrative to chart the evolution of Jane's rage from impotent frustration to principled defiance. While contemporary works like The Power and Gone Girl explore female rage through modern frameworks, Jane Eyre remains astonishingly relevant by documenting the genesis of such anger within Victorian constraints. Unlike more recent feminist narratives that position rage as reactionary, Bronte presents it as constitutive, not merely what Jane feels, but who she fundamentally is. The novel's enduring power stems from its refusal to offer easy catharsis. Jane's rage never fully dissipates because the conditions that create it, economic dependence, social hierarchies, and gender inequality, remain largely intact, even as she secures her personal happiness. Modern readers will recognize in Jane's journey not the outdated struggles of a bygone era, but the familiar contours of contemporary gender politics, the expectation to perform emotional labor, the diminishment of women's intellectual capacities, and the impossible choice between passion and propriety that still haunts women today. The novel's psychological acuity emerges through Bronte's meticulous attention to power dynamics. Jane navigates a world where her status as orphan, governess, woman renders her perpetually vulnerable, yet she leverages her moral authority and intellectual capability to establish equilibrium in relationships designed to subjugate her. The narrative traces her development from powerless child to self-possessed woman through language that shifts from fevered and fragmented to measured and decisive, mirroring her evolving relationship with her own anger. Bronte's stylistic innovations include her use of nature as emotional barometer, storms coinciding with Jane's internal tumult, barren landscapes reflecting her isolation, and her revolutionary decision to create a physically plain heroine whose appeal lies entirely in her fierce intelligence and moral courage. The novel's most mesmerizing quality remains its unflinching examination of female desire, not merely sexual, but existential. The yearning for a life uncircumscribed by gender, class, or convention. For the contemporary reader, Jane Eyre offers something rarer than catharsis, recognition. In Jane's controlled fury, we glimpse the origins of our own righteous anger and find a companion across centuries who understood that rage, properly channeled, becomes not destructive but transformative. The Handmaid's Tale stands as perhaps the definitive work of feminist speculative fiction, a category Atwood herself might prefer to call speculative literature. Through her meticulous world-building of Gilead, a theocratic regime risen from America's ashes, Atwood explores how female rage manifests when systematically suppressed. The novel's controlled first-person narrative mirrors the protagonist's carefully regulated existence. Offred's voice remains measured even as her interior life seethes with unarticulated fury. This restraint is precisely what makes the occasional eruptions so devastating. When Offred finally admits, "I don't want pain, I want to be angry," the admission reverberates precisely because it follows hundreds of pages of dangerous self-containment. Atwood's genius lies in her refusal to depict rage as merely explosive. Instead, she examines its many manifestations: the silent communion between handmaids exchanging forbidden names at night, the stubborn remembrance of past freedoms, and even the protagonist's insistence on reconstructing her story, an act of defiance bouxé through testimony. The novel's fragmented structure, with its sudden temporal shifts between before and after, creates a cognitive dissonance that mirrors Offred's fractured identity and builds toward a simmering emotional crescendo that never fully releases, just as women in Gilead cannot afford the luxury of outright rebellion. Cultural emotional resonance. While written in 1985, The Handmaid's Tale has achieved an unsettling timelessness that continues to resonate with contemporary readers concerned with reproductive rights and rising authoritarianism. Unlike works such as The Power, with its cathartic fantasy of female dominance, a book the user has shown interest in, Atwood offers no such comfort. Her unflinching examination of how quickly rights can dissolve keeps the novel perpetually relevant. What distinguishes Atwood's approach is her anthropological precision. She famously included nothing in Gilead that hasn't occurred somewhere in human history, grounding her speculative vision in uncomfortable reality. This historical anchoring makes the book's exploration of female rage particularly potent. It isn't merely fictional anger, but draws on centuries of documented subjugation. The handmaid's costume has become iconic precisely because it visualizes this rage-inducing paradox: the simultaneously hypervisible, yet silenced, woman. Key elements. At its core, The Handmaid's Tale examines how power operates through language, bodies, and intimate relationships. Atwood's protagonist navigates a world where even internal resistance can be revolutionary. The novel's most compelling aspect may be its examination of complicity, how women are forced to participate in their own oppression and that of others, complicating simple narratives of resistance. Stylistically, Atwood employs a clinical precision that occasionally breaks into startling lyricism, as when describing the commander's wife's garden, where blood drips onto the ground. These moments of unfiltered perception reveal the raw awareness beneath Offred's necessary performance of compliance. The narrative's refusal to provide easy closure mirrors the endless vigilance required of women facing systemic oppression, a condition that transforms suppressed rage into a survival mechanism rather than a luxury.